Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another episode of what is the Arsenal News Show. Joining you every morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Hope you're doing good. Hope you're doing well. Thank you as always for joining me. It's very much appreciated. I hope that you've had a fantastic start to your weeks. I hope that you've and will continue to have an excellent time in response to what was a weekend of frustrating football from an Arsenal perspective. But we're back on a Monday to talk about all things Arsenal, of course, and to get your thoughts on everything that is to do with the Gunners as well. Good morning to those joining us in the chat box. Thank you so much, as always, for joining me. Martin, Carl, Paul, Jimbo, Old Dave, Temi, Black Shine, Matt G, Arasilki, Peter, Sweating, Merlot, Damien, Amira. We've got Jakob, Maximius, Barry, Ray, Jalali, plenty more of you guys. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you. So, to kick off the show, let's talk about yesterday's horrific, and this doesn't go for just me, because there was a lot of Arsenal fans affected by what happened yesterday, trying to get back for Newcastle. Of course, what happens is with the Premier League is when you put games, away games in particular, for fans that have got to travel a certain distance in an evening, it means that you're effectively unable to travel home on the same day. So the game being at 5:30, I think the last train from Newcastle, certainly I was talking to one of the reporters who actually had to leave the game early, had to leave the game before 15 minutes before the end of the match to get a train home because there wasn't any others available that evening. It means that people have to stay over. And it means that the following day, fans have got to travel home. And so I stayed over, and obviously, as you know, I had a great time with some friends. And then, as you know, I was trying to aim to leave to get home yesterday. So it transpires that you get to the station, my 10 o'clock train had already been cancelled. So I woke up and my train had been cancelled. So I went and got the earlier train at 9:25, traveled about half an hour on the train, and then stopped for 2 hours, just under 2 hours, just stopped outside Darlington. And then we went back to Newcastle. So we had to get another train about 11:30. So this is 2 hours after I'd initially left Newcastle, just after, put about an hour and a half, 2 hours after I just left. So we're standing still for about an hour and a half. Then get on another train that leaves half an hour late, get back to Darlington, stop again for a period of time, managed to get through, got to York, stopped because there was a police incident on the train. Some people have got annoyed with each other, clearly, and, couldn't keep their emotions in check, which I get. Frustrations are running high on a very packed train back to London. It was a ridiculously long journey as it was because they were taking an additional route to get around the problems. There was like a power cut in the area. And then we had to travel another 2 hours, 2.5 hours back to London, of which I then had to wait an hour to get another train back home. So I left at 9:25. I got picked up from a station which is about a 20-minute drive from where I live because there's rail replacement services in my local area as well. So I ended up getting home, quotation marks, to the in-laws for dinner about 6:30. So 9 hours, 9 hours of traveling. It takes less than that to travel home in a car to Newcastle. It's honestly, it was a hell of a day. A ridiculous traveling day, but we made it. I made it home. There was a point where I thought I might be doing the show again from a Newcastle hotel this morning, but we're home. And that's the most important thing, that we made it. So happy days. I'm also, just thankful that we're kind of in a mental state of sanity this morning, because my goodness me, are we in a situation where there has been a lot of fallout, a lot of frustration, a lot of irritation, surrounding us today. So yeah, let's hope that we can discuss the news in a lot more calmer fashion. So, no easy results in the Premier League. We don't get that. There's never an easy result in the Premier League. We know this because I can tell you why we know this. The Newcastle result was obviously a really difficult game. It's arguably the third most difficult fixture behind Anfield and behind City. And Arsenal competed in this game really, really well. And despite the fact that you've got the biggest critics turning out in their droves saying we only created one real chance, had one shot on target, it's not good enough, etc., blah, blah, blah. We can talk about that in the second part of the show if you want to. But Newcastle, very tough place to go. But if Arsenal had done what either at Liverpool or Villa had done yesterday and lost at Forest, quite comfortably so after a really significant period of positive form, or drawn at Luton and had to come from behind with a 95th minute equaliser from a very emotional and quite rightly so Luis Diaz, then Can you imagine the meltdown? Can you imagine the meltdown of results? I reckon there were hundreds. I don't think there's hundreds. There's probably like tens of Arteta critics just sitting there waiting. Probably had their drafts ready to say about how Unai Emery is above Arteta in the table, and they had to wait. They might never get it. Hopefully, they never get that opportunity to, fill our timelines with the bilge that they spout. But yeah, they were ready with their drafts to say that Unai Emery had climbed. I think I saw a couple of people even tweet beforehand, but before the game, saying Unai Emery has the chance to overtake Arteta in the table, because that's the desperation that some of the people that don't like Arteta have these days. But it was not to be, as relegation fighting Nottingham Forest secured a 2-0 win, comfortable win over Aston Villa. And then later on in the evening, Luton Town nearly defeating Liverpool. Now, Liverpool do still go above Arsenal, and we'll look at the table here with goals scored. Because of one goal that they've scored, that Luis Diaz goal, they're going above Arsenal on goals scored. So very similar to when we were joint with Spurs earlier in the season. But the thing with Arsenal is now Arsenal have a great opportunity to go on a decent run. We've got a really good run of fixtures coming up. We've got Burnley at home, which you have to win. You've got Brentford away, which you have to win. You've got Luton away, which you have to win. You've got Wolves, Wolves away or at home, sorry, that you have to win. And then, of course, we've got the Aston Villa away game, which is a tough one. But if we win that game, obviously, that's a really positive result. No one's beaten Aston Villa at home, I don't think, this season. So it's going to be a difficult one, but certainly one that you'd back Arsenal to have a good chance in. So, yes, it's not as easy as people think, this Premier League get up. And the fallout from the Newcastle game, I think, has seen some rather ridiculous views. But perhaps what we should focus on is a positive. It's definitely a positive that we should focus on, because yesterday there was a fantastic result at the WSL for the Arsenal team playing against Manchester City, and Blackstenius with an 88th minute winner. Brilliant result. Man City were top of the table prior to this weekend, and it has changed things dramatically in the WSL. It means that Arsenal are joint on 10 points in what is an incredibly competitive table this season. Chelsea on 13 points. They've currently won 4, drawn 1. Man City, Spurs, Liverpool and Arsenal all on 10. And considering the start of the season that Arsenal had, massive result. And Catley, of course, getting a goal on the score sheet as well. Fantastic. I can't state how big of a result this is and how much Arsenal needed this going into this game. We have Viv Miedemar on the bench, Beth Mead on the bench as well. Arsenal and Jonas Ardeval finally getting back to the full fitness of their squad, seeing the full complement. When you've got a bench that includes, Viv and Beth and Marnham, you've got real strength and depth in that team. So there's some really exciting times, hopefully, to come, and they can build upon this win moving forwards. But of course, I think that even despite that fantastic result, the club statement that came out yesterday kind of overshadowed everything, not just in Arsenal's world, but also in the world of football, because we know that you all know the comments that Arteta made to Sky and to us in the press conference after the game. And he was very angry. He was very accusatory. He was very, very blunt and brash and, descriptive about things. And this certainly, I think, led the headlines yesterday and sparked the most discussion. So I'll read you the statement for those that have not had the benefit yet of reading it. It says, Arsenal Football Club wholeheartedly supports Mikel Arteta's post-match comments after yet more unacceptable refereeing and VAR errors on Saturday evening. We'd also like to acknowledge the huge effort and performance from our players and travelling supporters at St James's Park. The Premier League is the best league in the world with the best players, coaches, supporters, all of whom deserve better. PGMOL urgently needs to address the standard of officiating and focus on action which moves us all on from retrospective analysis, attempted explanations and apologies. We support the ongoing efforts of Chief Refereeing Officer Howard Webb and would welcome together to achieve the world-class officiating standards our league demands. I think it's a really strong statement. I think it's a really good and well thought out and supportive statement. And naturally and predictably, we've seen criticism of it from the usual, the usual people that would come out and criticize it. People that have made a name for themselves in kind of getting on Arsenal's back, and both in broadcast and in text as well. And I kind of just think that of all the people in the world at times to provide a little bit of perspective. Mark Goldbridge emerged yesterday as a person providing it. I don't know if you've seen this, but on his show, in which I think he was watching one of the games yesterday, Luton-Liverpool maybe, he pointed out that Michael Owen, who was very outspoken about Arsenal's statement, he was very right to point out, can anyone tell me who Michael Owen currently does a show with regarding refereeing decision and who's become a very seemingly close friend of at the moment? Yes, that's right. It's Howard Webb. Michael Owen does indeed do a show with Howard Webb talking about refereeing decisions in which he barely scrutinizes the results. So I can't say that it's. I can't say that we are in a situation of any opportunity to see any reasonable thought about Arsenal's statement come out, because of course the show and Gary Neville and Tony Carragher's Mark Stairs have their own links in there too. So I think the statement was really strong. I think disagreeing with it or criticizing it is just a bit of a cop-out and probably leans into a rhetoric which is not going to improve the standard of officiating. We know the standard of officiating needs to improve. We know that the decisions that are made on a consistent basis are wrong and inaccurate and simply are not what Arsenal and other clubs in this league deserve. The officiating quality is in the mud. The diversity of officials is frankly embarrassing. And because of that, we're obviously not going to see an Arsenal Football Club competing in a league that can be as legitimate and as consistent as it feasibly can be, because we're in a position where we can't have that because the officials just simply aren't good enough and they continue to make mistake after mistake. I saw a clip yesterday, and I don't think it's just it's not just England. Refereeing across the world is facing so many criticisms in France, in Germany, in Spain. In the United States, I saw a clip this morning. I don't know if it was a game this week, and a clip of LAFC against Vancouver, where a referee got in the way of a potential shot in the 93rd minute to equalise, and instead LAFC is able to run through and score a second goal to win the game. Your refereeing standards have dropped. I think that technology it needs to take over in this instance a lot more. We need to take the decisions out of the hands of these referees as much as possible. So when the ball crosses the line, we've got goal line technology. Offsides need to become more semi-auto offside, so the camera angles can determine whether or not a player is offside, and the referees and the humans involved in those decisions need to be taken out of the equation, so it can be made by a machine that has an exceptionally low mistake rate or error rate, and also any opportunity that you've not even just goal line technology, but kind of the line technology as well. I also think that when it comes to the human element of where there are subjective decisions that need to be made, it should be made by a third party. PGMOL cannot be involved in the VAR. It needs to be a third party that is involved in these decisions. People that are involved in football but have no connection on a social level to any of the officials that are involved in the game. And that's, I think, the way forwards in this instance. That is the only way in which that we can find a way forwards with this. So yeah, let's wait and see what happens. But I thought that the club statement was really good, really strong, and I think that the reaction to it was predictable, and it completely exposed the state of affairs that we currently have in this world, which is apologetic and dismissiveness. Like the way in which people dismissed Arsenal's statement, the way in which pundits dismissed it, like they dismissed Liverpool's statement as well. Liverpool, what I will say is the instance with Liverpool and Spurs, Liverpool are far, far, far more entitled than we are to be annoyed. The decision that went against us, there are more subjective question marks about it. Did it go out of play? Was it a foul? All these types of things. Sure, there's more question marks about that goal, even though it certainly wasn't a goal. And we can all agree that it was a foul at absolute minimum. Like someone asked me in the Discord, I think it was old Dave, to put a poll out asking what was the most egregious thing about that potential goal. And the answer for me is that whilst I wouldn't put like one thing, I don't think it was a case of like what was the one thing that should have ruled the goal out, because I think there's multiple reasons why it was, and so that means it should never have stood anyway. But we all agree that it was a foul. Like the foul on Gabriel is so blatant and obvious. Like the way Gary Neville tried to explain it away as if it wasn't a foul, despite the fact that we've seen that given so many times elsewhere on the field was quite frankly embarrassing in itself. But it's just with the Liverpool example. Liverpool were just absolutely robbed of a goal, a completely fine goal. And to say that the statement that they put out shouldn't have been put out and shouldn't have been allowed to stand or shouldn't have been allowed to question the referees in the way that it did is just a symptom. It's a symptom of making this situation worse. It's a symptom of allowing the refereeing standards to continue to spiral into mediocrity, below mediocrity. So, yeah, there you go. That's my rant for the morning. We're going to move to part two and your questions and thoughts on the game. And, of course, any of the news that we've discussed today right after this. Right then, I always do what I do when I play the break. I'm like waiting for the music to end, and then I'm like, oh, hold on. I was meant to take a sip of water during that break, so bear with, because otherwise I will struggle. Like I was on that train yesterday, because I had this bottle of water on the train to last me 9 hours, and on the second train there was like, they do like the little cafe on the train. Like they had it on the first train, so I was able to get a little bit of a refill. But on the second train, because it was an additional service that they put on for 6-7 hours back home, there was no refreshments at all. So it was hot as well. For November, it was a hot train because it was packed. So yeah, it was, tensions were high. But people remained in fairly good spirits. I met a couple of people. I met some Newcastle fans actually that were travelling to London to get a flight to Dortmund for their Champions League game, of which I wish them the best of luck. I've got nothing against Newcastle as a club. I've got nothing against their fan base. They all feel aggrieved by the Havertz situation, which I can empathise with. Whilst I've got issues with maybe the higher up side of the club, certainly the fans, Newcastle is a city that I love to visit. I love that. I think the fan base is fantastic. I think that the city's great. It's such a friendly place to go to, and I think that some of the nicest people that I come across in the business whenever I go up to the stadium and I have to work there. So yeah, it's I think both teams have their own grievances, if you like. So there you go. Let's go to the chat box, shall we, and tackle some of your thoughts. Matthew Boss says, Tom, what do you think about the foul on Nketiah? Arteta reckons that it's a penalty. Again, I think that's a subjective one. Arteta thought it was. I've been able to look back at it. It's not enough that I think you're going to see a VAR overturn it, but if it's given, I don't think you'd see it overturned in the opposite direction. That kind of tells you where we're actually in the state of things with refereeing. Amira says, quotation marks, stop whining and just score more. You played for a draw, is what people are saying online. I agree to a degree, and Amira says, I agree, but surely with competency, we minimum get a point. How is it any different from our earlier games against City? It's fine margins. And absolutely, we've been criticised in the past for, you think about the game on New Year's Day, I think it was against Man City, where we had one of our best performances. We went 1-0 up in the first half. And then because we weren't mature enough to see out the game, we made mistakes and players got sent off and we gave away penalties and lost the game. We've gone to Anfield before and taken the lead and then lost 4 or 5-1. We've gone to Anfield like we did last season and got 2 goals up. And then we didn't have the resilience, I suppose, the maturity, the composure to come away with a win in that game. And so this season, things have changed. And people continue to say to me, oh, we're worse this season. Oh, we don't look better. We were better last season. And to me, it's such a short-sighted view because it completely ignores so many different factors. First of all, there's a factor of one of the reasons why we're not as good as we were last season. It's because last season we had Thomas Partey available for the majority of the entire campaign. And yes, we've added Declan Rice, but you've replaced a world-class player with a world-class player. And obviously we've lost Granit Xhaka as well. So that's 2 of the key midfielders of our midfield from last season, not available this season. We've lost Jesus for a significant period. We've had Martinelli missing. We've had Trossard missing. We've had Timber missing for the entire campaign. We've now had Martin Odegaard missing for a couple of games. Saka was missing and we still beat Man City. We've had consistent problems with key players in this group. And people will say, well, we invested loads of money to make the depth better. And I'd say, yeah, we did. And there's probably a reason why we still went unbeaten until the game at the weekend, which saw key players like Jesus and Timber and Partey and Odegaard all missing, despite the fact we had to go to the third hardest away game in the season. And we approached this Newcastle game very similar to the way that we approached the Man City game. We were dogged, we defended well, we stayed in the game for as long as feasibly possible. We didn't create massive chances, but we were threatening, we were dominant, we controlled things. And I don't think there is any way that anyone could argue that we deserved to come out of that game with nothing. I think Arsenal deserved to come out of that game with something. You take, I saw, I don't always particularly agree with Le Grove on Twitter, but I did see a tweet from Le Grove yesterday that I absolutely agree with and highlighted it. Le Grove tweeting, Newcastle worth 0.16 XG when you take away their goal that was 6 centimetres off the line. How can I rereading that they wanted it more? Played like a newly promoted new promoted side away from home in their own backyard. And it's so incredibly true because it's all of this result analysis, what we talk about, what we mean by that is that people are looking at the scoreline and doing all their analysis of the fact that Arsenal lost, Newcastle won, and that's the story. And that's not the story. The story of the game is far different. Arsenal went to Newcastle and were, for me, the slightly better side, and ultimately were really hard done by with the decisions that came up, despite the fact that they were missing, and I know that Newcastle were missing key players as well, but Newcastle were able to kind of just kick Arsenal off the field with no retrospective action at all. And it's not a case of like Arsenal not having the cojones, as Troy Deeney might say. It's a case of Arsenal not being granted the environment to play in a legal way, because Bruno Guimaraes should have been sent off. We know that. And he did other things throughout the game that were not punished. And obviously the goal in itself is just a laughing stock of how it's able to stand. So, and I had a lot of, I had a lot of people in my comments yesterday who were Newcastle fans. And I get that, you've won the game, you feel great. I get that. So you're able to do that, if you like. You're able to be in a situation where you can be happy. But don't allow that to change your view of what, if we were a neutral or assessing the game. We all know that the goal wasn't a goal. We all know that Havertz was lucky not to be sent off. We all know that Guimaraes was lucky not to be sent off. We all know that it was not a game that deserved either side potentially getting a result. But it is what it is. But the result analysis is kind of crazy. The whole Arsenal didn't want it as much. It's just a load of BS, really. It's a crazy assumption to make. Chul says, the human element of refereeing has always been part of the game. The we were robbed factor is just a part of the game. I'd rather that than have an automated game. I'm not suggesting an automated game. I'm suggesting for the decisions that can be made automated, you can make them automated. I think that, for me, is the way forwards. And what I mean by that is decisions that aren't subjective should be allowed to be left up to technology. So offsides are not subjective. You are either offside or you're not offside. And the computer should be allowed to make those decisions. Now, that's not just on the PGMOL, by the way, because the Premier League clubs also voted against the use of semi-offsides. They also use that. The Premier League clubs also voted against the use of semi-automatic offsides. It needs to change. It needs to be brought in. So things that aren't subjective needs to be left up, and things that are subjective, I think, for me personally, should be specifically looking at. We should be specifically looking at a third party involved in those VARs. What's everyone laughing at? I know what we're laughing at. It's because Amira's unlocked my TGT rant of the day. Jimbo, yes, indeed. Amira did unlock the TGT rants today. Look, let's be honest. There was always one coming. There was always going to be a rant today. There was always going to be, at some point, something that was going to unlock my my frustration, my anger. So, there you go. We'll have to wait and see if indeed anything else is unlocked between now and the end of the show. We'll have to have a look, won't we? Right. Let's go to scroll down the chat a little bit more. Aware says, Tom, don't you think that we would have won the game if the goal had not have stood? I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and say yes, because, as I say, the game was playing out very evenly. It was playing out in a very competitive way. And neither team was creating much in the way of big chances. Neither team was creating much in the way of big chances. So I don't think you can sit there and say, oh, yeah, we would have gone on. What I do think, though, is if Bruno Guimaraes had been sent off, for that tackle really early on, then maybe. maybe things would have been very, very different indeed. I also think that the game really did highlight the scapegoating of Kai Havertz. Like I saw people posting, compilations of his performance, which I think was one of his strongest of the season, if not his strongest performance of the season. I think it was his best game. Obviously, the tackle wasn't great, and we can definitely argue that was a little bit rash. And maybe I don't mind seeing it. I know that we didn't get punished by it, and we could have been punished by it. But in some ways, it clearly showed how bothered he is. It clearly showed a show of intent from Havertz. But the amount of scapegoating of him, like I gave him, I think, a 6 or a 7 out of 10. I didn't give him like a crazy score. Because I would have wanted to see more, and I had to take the tackle and the naivety of that tackle into my score of him. But I think I gave him a 6. I could have given him a 7. I think it was his best game for us. And yet afterwards, the amount of people that pointed the finger at Havertz instead of Saka, for instance, was crazy. Saka was far worse than Havertz in this game. Far worse than Havertz in this game. And yet Havertz was the one being pointed at. Havertz was the one having his, typical criticism. I think that exposed and unveiled a lot of people's kind of bias against the player, for sure. Afterwards, if you saw people mentioning Havertz and in a critical way and not Saka, I think it exposed a fair few people. Matthew says, Tom, VAR wasn't supposed to take away goals based on 1 millimeter errors or a soft foul after being booked for 5 minutes from 6 different angles. True. Thankfully, there wasn't any soft foul, Matt, in that situation. It wasn't a soft foul. It was a clear and blatant foul. And so this incident certainly isn't one that you would put down to a soft foul. It was just a foul. So that's why. VAR is not there to re-referee games either. VAR is meant to be there to allow referees to see what is a clear and obvious error. And there were clear and obvious errors in the lead up to that goal. And that's why there is so much obvious anger about it. Esmond says it's funny. Havertz was so good, but our fans don't see it. They want him to score, forgetting he plays while Saka, Martinelli and Eddie were also poor. Amira says, I thought that was his best performance so far. He had a Xhaka type game, clumsy enough to get a first yellow, but kept his head not to get the second. I say not to get the second. There was a moment in the second half where I nearly thought that he might get a second yellow card, and maybe he was a bit fortunate there as well. But I liked the fact that he showed real intent in this game. There was a bit of bite about his performance, a little bit of application that we've not yet seen so far. Legend says Kai Havertz has committed more fouls, 14, than he managed shots and key passes in the Premier League this season. It's not bias, it's a fact. Look, Legend, I think, again, you're getting confused. You're talking about the season. No, we're not talking about the season. He's been disappointing this season. There's no one disagreeing with you. There's no one disagreeing with the fact that he's been disappointing and underwhelming this season. We're talking about last game, and specifically one game. And if you're coming out of that game and you're still battering Havertz, like I can see you're trying to and attempting to and undermining him here, that's a problem on you. That's not on him. It's about analysing game by game. It's about analysing things. If you want to have a broader opinion about his season, I don't think you're going to find many people disagreeing with you that he's been poor and underwhelming and that we expect more from him. You're not going to find many people disagreeing with that, if any. But if you're going to talk specifically about that game and you're coming out of that game and pointing fingers about across the season stats, saying that's not good enough, I just don't get it. It just comes across as a little bit, I don't like using the word agenda because I don't think it's fair, but it comes across as having kind of like a second motive there of just being too proud to hold your hands up and say, you know what, I've been critical of Havertz this season, but that was a good display. And hopefully we see more intent and application from him like we did in that game. Let's go to Jean says, why don't the VAR room ask the referees to get a second look at the goal? They clearly was unsure of their defending. I don't know. I don't know why if you have a VAR for the VAR, it will start getting silly because you then have VAR for the VAR for the VAR. It doesn't, it would just get a bit silly. I just think it should be a third party. I just think that there is something to be said about there being a detached group of people to assess things. So you don't have like the whole he's my mate thing that Mike Dean has done about. Kurt says Havertz hasn't been poor this season. He's been okay. I think maybe it's about perception. We've been so used to what Xhaka did last season. If you compare Xhaka's performances to Kai Havertz, poor is not a bad way of defining it in comparison. You might say he's been okay. He's not been good enough. I think that's the best way of putting it. He's just not been good enough. And that's what ultimately we want to see is better things from him. And that's why I said to Arteta in the press conference after the game, I wanted to highlight Havertz's display. Arteta was clearly too angry to talk about it in too much detail. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see Arteta in his press conference tomorrow. Of course, I'm going to be at London Colney for the open training session, so hopefully we see Odegaard involved. We'll know, of course, whether or not he's there very soon. So just stay tuned and keep your eyes peeled. It means that I hopefully still will be able to do the show tomorrow morning because the training session's late in the morning. But yeah, open training session tomorrow ahead of the game against Sevilla, and then the press conference. You'll be able to get all those updates on football.london and, of course, the Arsenal way as well. So make sure you keep sticking to that. Steve says, in criticising Saka, we should consider that he was kicked twice by Dan Burn consecutively without any repercussions from the referee. No one can continue to perform at a high level of kicking. Of course, Saka is always facing that, has faced that throughout his entire time with Arsenal, and which is why it sometimes is a little bit easier to assess his performance because he's always getting kicked. But he still was relatively ineffective in Saturday's game. Olu says, hey, Tom, should we play Havertz on the right and Odegaard in the 8 on the left? Havertz looks great as the right side. I think the right side of the 8 position is his best position. I think that's where you're going to get most from him, is in an attacking right-sided role. So he can cut onto his left foot when possible. That or playing as a second striker. The left side, the Xhaka role, I just don't think is that good for him. I was actually disappointed that when Fabio Vieira came on, that Havertz switched to the left. I think he would have been better staying on the right and Vieira then staying on the left. You remember Vieira's assist against Fulham came from that left-hand side, swinging that ball into the box for Nketiah. So I was a bit disappointed by the specificity of or the specifics of where those players were placed on the day. So that was frustrating. Darren says, Tom, any word on Andre from Fluminense? Seems like a lot of talk about Liverpool moving ahead of Arsenal. You're going to see names pop up. You're going to see names fade away. It's just the way we've come to expect of this. So yeah, don't expect any kind of further news on Andre until maybe closer to. We're always going to see these things. We're always going to see these things happen. Sabra says, by the way, Tom, I see that the club appreciate you and your questions. I saw Arteta recognise your name, and that was nice to see. I was like, I start my days with that guy. Thanks, Sabra. That's very kind of you. Arteta was. I don't think he did. I just think that I think there's something to be said about trying to sometimes move the conversation on from the anger. That was, I could have asked another question about a VAR, and I just thought, I don't know what that's going to bring to the conversation. So I wanted to move it on to kind of looking ahead to what's next, because you can't always just linger on what's happened. You have to move the conversation forwards. Gary says, why don't we as a country swap referees with other countries so that there's no buddy sticking up for each other? It's difficult from a social standpoint to expect referees to move to other countries, and they've got families here. I get the idea in principle, Gary, but I just don't think it's not feasible to put that into practice. Let's go to scroll up a little bit more. Lai says VAR is just technology. If it is not good enough, it is easy to fix. It's the human factor and errors that is questionable and hard to fix. Absolutely. The Fab19 says January couldn't come sooner. We need reinforcements. I hate to be the bearer of bad news regarding the January transfer window, but for Arsenal to make reinforcements, we have to move players out. We have a 25-man squad. We don't have room for any more players. Cedric is the obvious one that you can move on, but he's a defender. You're going to replace a defender with a midfielder or an attacker. I don't know if they're going to be able to do that because of the lack of depth in defence in certain positions. If we have a significant injury situation in defence, we might need another senior defender, even if it's Cedric. And if you replace Cedric, if you don't replace him a defender, it leaves you quite short in that area of the field. I know Timber's out and could be coming back in March, April, May, but it could be May. So it's difficult. I think that you could question that maybe some players could leave on loan. Smith Rowe could go on loan. Fabio Vieira could go on loan. You could loan out some players, then invest, and then have to move some players on in the summer. That might be a way around it. But also, we didn't sign David Raya on a permanent deal because of FFP factors. So there's something to be said about the finances of Arsenal that won't be more freer until the summer. So if those that are expecting January to be our saviour, I'd say temper those expectations, because there's no guarantee that is going to happen, because there's no guarantee that it can or is feasible to happen. I hope that we do see an improvement and we do see reinforcements, but it's very, very difficult to see that. AC says, are there any academy and under 23 defenders that can come in like Omar Rekic? So AC, I'm assuming, and I do apologize if I'm wrong with this, and you are far from the only one that's going to be, but I assume that most fans aren't really that in with the youth side in the sense of knowing how good players are, how players are performing on a regular basis. I think that Omar Rekic is a talented young player, but of maximum championship level. And those that would have seen him struggle in the Eredivisie with Sparta Rotterdam, where he was barely able to get a minute for them. He's gone to Wigan for last season, or half of last season. He's gone back to Wigan this season. He's not, Omar Rekic is not going to be of an Arsenal level. People have talked about Miguel Aziz in the past, again, not sadly of an Arsenal level. Mika Biereth, people were speaking about him, maybe potentially have a future Arsenal. He's gone to Motherwell this season again. He's not going to be, sadly, with respect of Arsenal level. And that's very normal. The idea that players make it through the academy into the Arsenal senior side, it's very rare. Of hundreds of players that are in the academy, one or two make it through. We are lucky to have Nelson and Nketiah and Saka and Smith Rowe have made it through. But if you look at the players currently in the youth setup, even Sago Jr., who played against Brentford and got the opportunity, it's a struggle to see him making it. At the senior level, it's really difficult to see him, even though he's performing well. Again, it's really difficult to see how he's going to progress. Mario Koja-Dubry, Ethan Nwaneri, Lewis Miles Skelly, at this stage, they're still too young, especially the latter two. Miles Skelly and Nwaneri, there's still a lot more development for them to have before they can get those opportunities at the senior level. Raw Waters, think about Raw Waters, was really highly rated, still is highly rated. But again, seeing an opportunity for him in the senior side, it's not necessarily so cut and dry. If you look at the players that are currently out on loan, like Brooke Norton-Cuffy, we used to talk about him a hell of a lot. He's gone to, I think, Millwall this season. I've not heard about anything in regards to pulling up trees. And probably the biggest of the bunch, Charlie Patino, of course. Again, there's no guarantees that he even makes it into the side either. So it's difficult. It's very difficult for young players, youth players, to make it into the team. Souza, legend again, talented left back. How he gets in above Timber and Zinchenko and Tomiyasu, very, very difficult to see that happening. Very difficult indeed. It's not to say that they aren't good players. They're good young players, but to take it this step is just humongous. A humongous step. On Volley says, we need to scout another Santi Cazorla type of player with the technicality that he had. I would love to see a Santi Cazorla level player come to Arsenal again. It'd be great, but very, very difficult to find that. Dejan says, Tom, not a Havertz fan, but he had a good game and was one of the few players that had fight in him. I think this game will be the turning point. It's interesting saying about the few players that had fight in them, because I think that we had a fair few players that had fight in them. I think Tomiyasu and Gabriel and Saliba and White to a lesser degree, and certainly Declan Rice, even Jorginho. I think there was fight in those players. Havertz, as you say, again, showed fight. I think Martinelli showed fight. But Nketiah, Saka, it didn't really go for those two. And that's why we lacked an attack, because the attack was what was clearly the problem. Shiadozi says, please, Tom, do you know what Fabio Vieira's role in this squad is? This is his second season and he has yet to convince me. His depth for the attacking midfield. That's his role at the moment. He provides depth and a rotational figure for those in attacking midfield. And I think it's fairly obvious what his best position is as kind of a 10. But when you're just not at that same level as Martin Odegaard, it's very difficult to find a player that you can sign to do that. It's like the expectation that we just get a better player than Eddie Nketiah. Eddie Nketiah, for all of his limitations and for some of his disappointing performances, he's one of the best number 2 strikers in the league. He's one of the best backup strikers that there is around. And that's why I'm saying that for people that want to replace Eddie, that shouldn't be your mindset. The mindset should be, let's upgrade on Jesus. That should be the mindset. So when people say, well, Tony's better than Eddie Nketiah, so I'm going on a Tony thing. I didn't really want to. But it's just a good example. Well, Tony improves us because he's better than Eddie. That's not the mindset for me. The mindset has to be upgrade on your starting player, so your starting player becomes the number 2. And that's the way forward. So we replace Xhaka technically with Rice, because we signed a player, in my view, that could have been even better than Partey, and that Rice eventually would have overtaken Partey. So you had Partey and Rice in the team, so you leveled things up. But Partey's sadly not been available for us much this season, so that's been a big problem in that regard. So that I think is important. But no, I'm not going to get tempted into a Tony thing today. I already put a tweet out yesterday about it. More than a wheelchair, Chris says, Tom, it will never happen, but I'd go all out and get Jack Grealish and put him in centre midfield as a new Santi Cazorla. Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's ever going to happen, mate, I'm afraid. Vincenzo says, if we move on Smith Rowe, would Charlie Patino take his place in the squad? I don't think so. They're very different players. Smith Rowe's a much more final third player, I think, than the Patino. More of a central midfielder is Charlie, whereas Smith Rowe's more of an out-and-out attacker than Patino is. So I don't think he would. I think he'd more so replace... it's difficult because we don't really have any out-and-out centre mids. I mean, he's more in the mould of a Declan Rice in the sense of, in the 8 role, when Rice plays ahead of another DM, that's where I look at Patino. So I'd see maybe him playing with Declan Rice. If Declan Rice goes back to 6, then you play Patino. I guess Xhaka. I guess he replaces kind of Xhaka in a way if he was to come into the squad rather than a Smith Rowe type. Paul says, is Eddie's lack of away goals really poor? And should he play in away games as he offers very little? It is poor. It's not a good record at all. And it certainly needs to improve. And we're still going to see more of Nketiah, I think, because Jesus is out for the foreseeable. Let's see if he can get some goals in the next run of games. We've got a very good run of fixtures, as I said at the start of the show, coming up. So let's wait and see if that has desired impact. Right, let's end the show there, shall we? Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. It's very much appreciated. Thank you to everyone that continues to support the channel. And please do drop a like on the video. I would like to end the show just with something that I did mention on yesterday's show, because I think it's important to be aware of what's going on. Newcastle United released a statement after the game, which I only became aware of when someone sent it to me yesterday and said it in the show. But they released a statement regarding the racist abuse from Arsenal, quote unquote, fans that was subjected to both Joe Willock and Bruno Guimaraes. They released a statement out on the website where they said, Newcastle United strongly condemns racist abuse sent to Bruno Guimaraes and Joe Willock via social media following Saturday's victory over Arsenal. Our message is clear. There is no room for racism in football or society. We are providing support to Bruno and Joe and will work with relevant authorities and social media platforms to identify those responsible so they can be held to account. It's disgusting that this happens. And I'm sure that sadly there are people that watch this show that may be behind those comments, that watch this back. And if you are one of those people, get yourself educated. You need to learn. You need to become educated on why this is so important to be aware of. You need to learn why it's so wrong to say some of the things that you've posted and said. And in my eyes, you're no Arsenal fan. You're not part of this Arsenal community if you're doing these things. And it's not just with racism. It's with xenophobia. It's with sexism. It's with homophobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. All of these things. If you're part of any of that, you're not part of this family, because you need to learn what it is to be, first of all, human and a good person. But just you need to grow up and learn why it's wrong. So I encourage you to please go out and find that and not be just so proud in your own opinions, your own views. If you've been, maybe it's just the way you've been brought up. And I get that happens, because sometimes education as you grow up isn't accessible to you. But it is now. If you're listening to this and you hear me, understand this message, please get the support, get the education that you need so that you don't take part in these horrific acts. I don't want to have to be talking about it. I'm never not going to talk about it, because it's important, whether it's my club, whether it's another club's supporters that have done this. It was always going to be a topic that we talk about very, very openly and honestly. So please do get the support and education that you need to understand why what's been said is wrong. If you can't work out why it's wrong, then you are part of the problem at the moment and need to find yourself to be the solution. I can't help you always. I'm happy to help as much as I can. If you've got your own issues with anything that I've said there, please reach out to me. I'm more than happy to talk to you about it. But you can only be the solution to yourselves by actively trying to understand why it is wrong for those things to be said and posted on other players' Instagram feeds as well. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. Please drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I hope you have a very, very good start to your week. Please stay safe. Please stay well. Stay positive, and I'll be back with you tomorrow morning for all of the latest on Arsenal's game against Sevilla. And as always, up the Arsenal.